Hello, welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. Today, in light of recent events, we're going to be talking about the topic of doping. So recently, Ruth Chepngetich was suspended for the use of a banned substance. She is technically the world's record holder in the women's marathon, as I believe it was ratified. She is quite the big hitter. She ran 2:09 in the marathon. This is quite the blow to the running community, and especially to the country of Kenya. And a lot of people are calling for a complete ban on the country of Kenya, much like was done with the country of Russia. And today, I'm going to try to convince you on why that's not exactly the greatest idea. I'm kind of going to go over a few points on why I think we shouldn't necessarily put Kenya in this bubble of being a much dirtier country than every other nation in the world. I'm going to try to give you some reasons why I think that maybe these other countries may not be as clean as you think they are, and why Kenya might just be the best at catching these cheaters. So let's get into it. Firstly, let's talk about the history of Kenya in distance running. Kenya has had excellence in the 800 all the way up to the marathon, which, funny enough, they actually have the world record in the 800 and the marathon on the men's side. This just shows the dominance they have in the sport of distance running, that being paired, of course, with their East African brothers, Ethiopia. I think those are two of the greatest running nations in the world, and it's just because they kind of have this little bit, they're kind of built to run. You know, they're at this high altitude. If you look at their bodies, you know, they're thinner usually on average. They don't hold quite as much body fat or store it because they live in a little bit of a warmer climate. They also have just these long legs and these beautiful strides. You see, they're just built to run and built to run fast. That is without a doubt. Now, with all this great success in the sport of distance running, there's going to be temptations, you know. Once you get to the highest level of something, there's going to be temptations to, you know, do things that may not be ethical, may not be the right thing to do. But sometimes that can lead people to dark places, and that can lead people to do things that they regret. That being doping. So that leads me to the problem at hand. With all the success in distance running, all these medals, all this greatness, all these fast times, has led to a lot of problems with doping. A lot of Africans are getting caught. You know, every couple of months we're seeing a new African, a new major hitter in the sport getting suspended or banned. And it's not a good look for the nation, and a lot of people are taking notice. A lot of people are starting to get this stigma around Kenya and East Africa in general, that if an East African is fast and we've probably never heard of you, you're probably a cheater. And a lot of people also think that they lie about their birth certificates. Well, you know, it's a third world country. It's hard to keep track of actual ages. While yes, there are some crazy phenomenons, like the fact that Brian Masau is allegedly 18 years old, younger than me, while currently going to be a junior in college. Don't know how that works. But, you know, there are some logistics there that are very hard for them to do, because some people just don't have their documents right on their births. I mean, they just don't have birth documentation over there for some people. So it's a little bit harder for them. No need to judge them for that. You know, everyone's got to do what they got to do, but I digress. The main problem at hand is doping, and there's just this stigma around Kenya that all great Kenyans are dopers. And I'm going to try to help you kind of change your way of thinking around that, and maybe think to yourself, think twice about your favorite athletes and their performances. And that brings me into the entirety of this video. So yeah, let's for real get into this. Let's deep dive into different aspects on why I think that maybe we shouldn't just blame Kenya as a nation, but kind of look at our sport as a whole and kind of rethink. First topic of discussion is, where are these drugs coming from? First off, I want to kind of realize that drug use is very, very rampant through Kenya. It's very easily accessible in the form of EPO. That is not, of course, the drug that Ruth Chepngetich was caught and busted for. She was busted for a diuretic a lot of people think was used to cover up for other drug use, but it is still very, very easy to get the drug of EPO in Kenya. I've seen a documentary where you can basically get it prescribed by a doctor. And a part of the reason why it's so easy to get EPO in Kenya, is because the sport of distance running is so deeply rooted in their culture. It's kind of like American football. And basically, because of how deeply rooted the sport of distance running is in their culture, there's going to be a lot more things that come with the sport, such as drug use, and it's going to be a lot more common. Not to take away from this next part that I'm going to talk about, but I just wanted to kind of show you that drug use is very rampant. It's not just coming in from an outside source, which we're going to talk about right now. Another way that these athletes are getting drugs is through foreign coaches and foreign agents. Ruth Chepengetich's agents has been speculated to be giving drugs to other athletes, and he's had numerous people busted for drugs in the past. And a lot of people think that there are certain agents who go about doping their athletes in a certain way. And another way that these athletes are also getting drugs is, of course, their coaches. You know, Alberto Salazar was known for doping up his athletes, even though he never really had an athlete caught, which is something we're going to get onto later. But yeah, basically, there are some outside sources. It's not just Kenya, the country itself, bringing in all this dope. There's also, you know, coaches and sponsors and agents distributing these drugs. The next aspect of the sport we're going to talk about is drug testing. So it is very, very easy to kind of get away with drug tests because EPO is quite a quick digesting drug. You know, it can get out of your system rather quickly. Lance Armstrong was able to use it for years and years and years without getting caught. And a lot of athletes like to use the same claim that he says, where I've been tested so many, I'm the most tested athlete in the world and I've never been caught, so I can't be doping. Well, that's just not true. These athletes, they know what they are doing because their coaches are basically chemists. You know, they have these billion-dollar industries to go against drug tests, to cheat drug tests. You know, you may not like to hear this, but the sport is rampant with drugs. It's just about how you can get your body to metabolize their drugs, get it out of your system before the drug tests come. People are blasting it during the off season, and they're just not coming up on drug tests because they know how to go about it. They have these coaches, they have these facilities, they have these sponsors that know what they're doing, that know how to get this drug through your system. Now, coming from a third world country, Kenyans do not exactly have the same luxury of that. They're kind of just taking the drug and kind of just thinking, well, maybe it'll go away, maybe it won't. They don't exactly have the knowledge on how to use and hide the drug quite as much as these other people may have. You know, I'm not here to point out and say, oh, this guy's doping, this guy's doping. There's really all speculation. You know, a lot of people are competing with the best in the world, and a lot of people who are the best in the world are doping. So I think it's very hard to kind of look at someone such as Grant Fisher and say that he's completely clean, but then we see someone like Yomif Kajelka, my GOAT. A lot of people love to say that he's doping. Well, yes, he was with the Nike Oregon Project. Every Nike Oregon Project athlete in the U.S. was heavily glazed, and a lot of people will not admit to this day that Galen Rupp was doping, when it is almost 100% of fact that Galen Rupp was probably doing some sort of doping, whether it was in between the lines, kind of gray area. We all know he was on the gray area stuff, but we don't exactly know to what extent he was doing. A lot of people think that Galen Rupp was doping at a very young age because he was coached by Alberto Salazar, who was busted for being this horrible person as a coach. But that's a side tangent. Back to the point at hand. It's that these Kenyan athletes, they don't exactly know how to go about doping. They're not as knowledgeable on the subject as a lot of Americans are, or Europeans. Europeans have been evading they've been evading drug tests since the beginning of time. Lasse Viren would legally blood dope back in the day. World record holder, beat Steve Prefontaine in the Munich Olympics. I believe he was from Finland, if I'm remembering correctly. But yeah, he was literally legally blood doping. Europe was absolutely flooded with dopers back in the day. That's why there's a lot of women from Europe that have world records, and no one's been able to beat them to this day. You know, Europe was just flooded with doping. It's almost as bad as what Russia and what Kenya was. But that is a great segue to the next topic. A lot of people are comparing Kenya to Russia. Now, the main difference between Russia and Kenya is that Russia was a state-sponsored doping program. Kenya is not state sponsored. Kenya actually wants to catch these dopers. Kenya is doing their best to catch these dopers because quite frankly, they're getting close to being kicked out and banned from these sports because they are just continuously getting caught and continuously getting suspended. So what Kenya is trying to do is trying to catch these cheaters and get them out of the sport so they can stay cleaner and look better in the eyes of like World Athletics or the Olympic committees and such. And they actually have the ANAK, which is an organization that suspends athletes just like WADA would do, or the AIU. Now, they don't exactly get the same high-profile clients, but they're still handing out suspensions. They're still catching athletes. They may not be quite the mainstream athletes that they are. Ruth Chepengedich, I believe, was caught by the AIU. She was not caught by the ANAK, but that's, of course, because she's a high-level athlete. She's tested by the upper echelon of doping agencies. But a lot of people like to say that the ANAK is not doing their job, when in all reality, they are still handing out suspensions. They're catching athletes. There was like 26 Kenyan athletes caught in 1 week at one point. They're catching their athletes. They're doing the best to catch their athletes. You don't see stuff like that happening in the U.S. or Europe. While you could say, oh, it's because the U.S. and Europe doesn't have that many people doping. I guarantee you there are quite a large amount of athletes in both the U.S. and Europe who are doping. I bet there are a lot of college athletes who are doping that you don't know about. And the thing is, we'll never actually know about. It's very hard to know who's doping and who's not, because you see these people competing and doing these great things. They're running crazy fast times. They're showing just how fit they can be. But then they get caught for doping, and then someone that has run similar times, you have to question the legitimacy of what is possible. We'll never know what's humanly possible because we'll never know for sure, deep down in our hearts, for a fact that an athlete is not doping. And that's one of the great things about this. It all circles back to this. It doesn't matter what anyone else runs because we don't know what their circumstances are. We don't know what's going on in their life. We don't know if they're on drugs. We don't know if they're cheating. But we do know what ourselves are doing. And that's all that matters, is what we can do as our own person. So if anything from this video, I want you to remember to strive to compete for yourself. Don't compare yourself to others because you don't know what they've been through. You don't know the circumstances of their lives. They don't have the same experience as you. You don't have the same experiences as them. Their life's completely different. Their biological, their physiological differences. It just doesn't matter. At the end of the day, you're the only one that matters. Get out there, compete, do what you love in the sport of distance running. Don't spread hate, spread love. And that pretty much does it. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to like, subscribe. Peace out. As this video comes to an end, I want to say thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Please subscribe if you can, as well as follow me on all my other socials. I do have a TikTok and a podcast on Spotify. If nothing else, I hope you enjoyed the video. Peace out.